Streaming now. Okay, we are live. Welcome to our weekly basic income discussion group. Happy Halloween, everybody. Tonight we're talking about cryptocurrencies and blockchain. There are a number of different projects out there that are attempting to implement basic income using blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And cryptocurrency is this kind of interesting thing because it falls at the intersection of technology and economics and politics, almost. Yeah.
Sure.
So I think, in order to properly implement a basic income, or at least in order to do it in a way where you understand what you're doing, you need to know what money is. So we have a small group tonight. I kind of want to go around the room and get everyone's idea of how they would define money, just to kind of start us off. And I'm not going to start with Bethany because I talk to her all the time. So she's going to say the same thing as me, probably.
No, I mean, there's many ways to.
So we'll start with Jake.
Boy. Well, certainly it's sort of today as it exists, it's almost like this unitless, sort of seemingly interchangeable for anything sort of amount that we sort of express value of things in impersonal way and that helps mediate exchange. But if we're asking like where money comes from, because I think that sort of a lot of blockchain projects are sort of like questioning this, like, okay, we have this, great, but where does it come from? I would say I don't quite know or understand that yet. I sort of like David Graeber's thoughts that he expresses in Debt, the first 5,000 years, and I find them interesting, that they're sort of, that state money exists today, sort of is a way that government like can exert its control and dominion over a piece of land by saying, and it can create sort of value by saying that like this is a unit that people have to pay their taxes in. So we're going to distribute these tokens, and these tokens sort of have to come into us at some set interval, or a set amount of them has to come back into us at the end of the year. And that allows them to sort of have sort of purchasing power as an institution, sort of almost over everyone else, because they're the ones like that are explicitly creating that money in the first place, and then have the authority to make more because they're just tokens that they're handing out. So yeah, I think that a lot of that is sort of like abstracted away from us, especially in the US, because sort of our currency is almost like the global thing that everything is like valued against. And you can, sort of exchange US dollars for pretty much any local currency anywhere. And so I think that like that notion, since we do almost use like this like universal thing on a day-to-day basis, those origins sort of get abstracted away from us a lot more than they would say in like Venezuela or something like that.
Cool. Nick.
I don't have a great answer. I think that the discussions that I've been in here have been have shaken up my understanding of what money is, and it's shifting. But I guess I think one definition for me is that it's it's like this fluid flowing through society that is used to kind of control like who gets what, who gets to do what, who gets to live where. And
Okay.
that's one angle on it.
Cool.
That's rattling around in my head, I guess.
Richard.
Unit of exchange that's more convenient than bartering. in take form of paper or coinage or credit or plastic is part of credit and the electric currency like what I guess Bitcoin or like you can trade like bonds or stocks or anything like that.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Now we'll go to Bethany.
Yeah, money. I think I would agree that's like a standardized unit of exchange that there's like common knowledge of the value. So people are kind of coordinated on the value of it. And it helps people to make all sorts of different kinds of exchanges like much more fluidly. Yeah. And I agree that it takes a bunch of different forms. So I think I largely agree with Richard's answer.
Yeah. I would say that money is a standard unit of value in terms of which we trade. So it's the thing that we set prices in. It's the unit we think in terms of when we think of value and when we're trading with each other. And I would say that any large-scale system of trade needs some kind of standard unit of value so that people can coordinate on these things. And supply can meet demand and prices can adjust. You can't have efficient markets without some kind of standard of value that people trade in terms of. So when you're trading, I agree with Nick as well that money is something that flows through the economy because when you're trading for money, that money is being traded and it flows. It's the counter. It's the opposite side of anything you're trading for money. Money goes the other way. So goods flow in one direction and then money flows in the other direction. And of course, we can get into all kinds of complexities about things that are more or less like money in the economy. But really, the idea of money and the idea of a currency in particular is to have a standard unit of value, just in terms of which we can conceptualize everything in the economy. We can all coordinate on it. And I would say that economists, in their models, they're often not thinking about money, but they do have this kind of abstract notion of price. And they say, oh, this isn't any particular unit of currency or anything like that. But when you look at a supply and demand graph, it has price on one of the axes. And this is like some kind of abstract notion of the value of the goods being traded relative to each other and that kind of thing. And they need to do this. They need to have this abstraction in order to make their models work. But we also, in the public, we need a similar abstraction in order to make our markets work. So this is that abstraction for us. That's what money is. And I would say it's an inevitable emergent property of any large-scale system of trade. You can't have big markets operating efficiently without money. If anyone has heard of this book before, A Market Theory of Money by John Hicks, I highly recommend it. It's not very long. He's a famous economist, and this is the last book he wrote before he died in 1989. And I just think it really kind of takes this approach of money as something that emerges as a result of trade. Yeah. And the key thing is it has to be stable and it has to be standard. Like if you have, so this is an issue with cryptocurrencies right now, and potentially ongoing into the future, is that their purchasing power changes. Their value relative to the ordinary goods you can buy in the economy changes. It swings wildly. It goes up and up and up, or down and down and down, or back and forth. And then you can't really coordinate value on that. You can't really have markets adjust.
Which makes it harder. Right?
It makes it harder, right? And the less stable it is, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I was in Brazil in the 90s, and I remember I was there for a few months, and prices were doubling like about every month.
Yeah.
And people live with that, right? Like millions of people dealt with that.
Yeah.
But it certainly had consequences, right? I mean, you get your paycheck, you go out and you spend it that day. Because if you wait
right
a few days, you're going to get less for it.
Did you ever listen to that Planet Money podcast where they talked about how they fixed the inflation in Brazil in the 90s?
I think I might have.
Yeah.
But
It was really cool.
The
Yeah, so essentially what they did was they said, okay, we're going to take a basket of goods and this basket of goods has one, currency unit of value, and then every day we're going to say how much inflation there is in our actual currency, and how many of these standard units it's worth day to day. So then they asked, supermarkets and places to price their groceries in terms of the standard unit, and then every day you'd go and you'd check out your groceries, and they'd check those prices against, how much currency that actually corresponds to, and it would of course go up and up and up because you're still having the inflation.
Right.
But then once they got the whole system used to pricing everything in these standard units, then they issued bills that were representing the standard unit. And then the inflation was gone. Yeah, but then once you have those standard units, it makes the markets more efficient. And obviously they were doing this, as you say, but that was a problem. Like, this was causing serious problems in the economy. And when you have a currency that's not stable over time, it could be going up in value or going down in value, or prices could be going up or going down. But if it's too much, then that creates a very strong incentive for people to find something more stable to use as their currency. So a question, that I always ask when we're talking about cryptocurrencies is, how do you keep the value, the purchasing power of a cryptocurrency stable enough that you would want to set prices in terms of this currency? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is going to come. I think that part of the problem right now is that, like, the technology is still so young. The transaction volumes that these networks can have, like, they can't replace sort of global financial institutions. They can't even replace, if he says like 40,000 transactions per second, the Ethereum network can handle like 150 right now, and that's like screaming fast. So I think that, like, as there's sort of a race to get this stuff built and it's all very exciting, it's sort of like, it's more like companies' stocks, right, at this moment, going up and down and fluctuating wildly, and less like a real currency. But I think that those things will stabilize. They're also, just because the nature of the tools, like, there are sort of stable subcurrencies. So kind of like the thing that happened in Brazil, right there. There are people who have created these protocols where you can sort of lock up certain, and it's like this. There's some of these cryptocurrencies aren't just currencies, but they have like contracting languages in them too, so you can specify complex rules and sort of like a computer program that runs in a sort of secured fashion, with this cryptocurrency sort of like underlying the security of all of it. But there's ways that so one of the things, like MakerDAI has a stable coin where they there's a contract. People are sending in the price data from a whole bunch of different websites and trading sites that collect this price data. So that's available to the network, and then you can lock up your.
Is it prices in terms of other currencies, or is it
prices in terms of USD?
Oh, in terms of USD.
So
prices of specific goods? Or?
Prices of the underlying cryptocurrency. So prices of
in dollars.
Ethereum, prices of Ethereum.
So price of dollars, basically.
The Ethereum network, just like Bitcoin, right, has its own underlying currency that it issues, and Ethereum is called Ether, and that is like bought and sold on markets, and so you can sort of discover a US dollar price for it, and that's what's important to the network. So then people can and essentially are incentivized to take the Ether that they own, lock them up in a smart contract, and take out essentially a loan of these new tokens, which represent US dollars, but they're now sort of on the chain, backed by this sort of fluctuating currency. And if like the amount of stake that you have holding up your loan ever like drops below something like 130%, you can either you can keep on putting more Ether into that account to keep what you took out floating, or you can give back the currency that you took out. And if it falls under a certain threshold, then your asset there will be liquidated. That you are no longer the owner of the.
So the loan is
Ether that you
denominated in dollars, and then when you pay back the loan, you have to pay an appropriate number of ether based on whatever the price of ether is at that time when you pay it back. Is that
Stable
correct?
coins. You have to pay back the stable.
You have to pay
coins.
back the stable coins.
Oh, okay.
Does
Yeah,
the stable
or-
coin? Wait, I got.
I
lost.
see. So you borrow
Yeah.
the stable coins, and they're worth, like, you're borrowing $10, 10 stable dollar coins, and then that's worth a certain amount of ether when you first borrow it.
Mhm.
So what you do is you give the ether, and you get these stable coins.
Yeah.
But if the price of ether starts to get too low, as in, like, you're worried that the system is worried that it's not going to really cover $10 anymore, you have to put more ether in to keep your
Yeah,
loan going.
That makes sense. But
Yeah.
but why do you have the stable coins? I missed the whole point.
Because you want a stable currency to use
Oh, and the stable coins
and
are more
have it be
stable
on the
in
blockchain,
value?
presumably.
Yep.
Yeah.
How do they
Exactly.
keep the value of the stable coins stable?
In exactly this way, where if the price of ether drops below the amount of your loan, you have to put in more
Right.
ether.
But how do they not make them go up in value? How do they prevent them from going up in value?
I don't know. Do they try to prevent them from going up in value?
Yeah, they do, and I think it's just that, like, if they start going up in value, right, anyone can take out
I see.
loans at the dollar rate, right, and sell
Right.
at that rate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So
So
there'd be an
there's-
arbitrage opportunity.
Exactly.
But the interesting thing is, like, rather than like a traditional loan where you say, like, you know, if I don't make payments or whatever, you can take my car, right? Or like, you know, a traditional line of credit where you're sort of giving the bank sort of control over this. It's really like the money that you're putting in to get your like temporary loan or your like stable form of your loan. You can like verify that that is actually owned by you, right? And the only condition under which this ever leaves your hands or leaves your control is if this, if the price falls below what you can
Right.
put in there.
So I'm curious about something you said before. You mentioned that you felt like as the number of transactions increases, that the price of a cryptocurrency or the value of a cryptocurrency would stabilize over time. What do you imagine the mechanism would be for that to occur?
Yeah, so I think I think there's going to be, right, like the initial protocol of Bitcoin, right, had sort of its economic policy hard coded in from the beginning of there will only ever be asymptotically approaching 21 million coins,
Right.
which is sort of, that's a stated economic policy, and there's like pretty much nothing at this point that you can do to change that, and that's just there. And a lot of people can debate the brilliance or the stupidity of that economic policy, but I think like the long-term success of Bitcoin sort of in part depends on that economic policy. So if it is a precondition that currencies need to be stable in order to be useful, then and you can sort of define these rules as you wish when you create a currency, then the cryptocurrency that will survive will have the rules embedded in it, which make it stable. So you can build a cryptocurrency where encoded in it is like there's this one dictator person who gets to sort of just set the economic policy, right? Or you can have a sort of some sort of democracy to sort of set these economic parameters and money minting or whatever.
So I don't know that a cryptocurrency has to be stable in order to be useful, but it would have to be stable in order to be a currency, to be like used as a currency and serve that function in the
Sure.
economy. Yeah. What was I going to say? So you believe that the cryptocurrency that's going to be stable is the one that's going to have proper kind of economic policy baked into it.
The ones that are going to be stable or
Yeah.
successful. I think the ones that are going to be
Stable.
stable are going to be the ones that have sort of proper economic policies in place.
Okay. And so you mentioned this one coin. just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
What was it again?
Maker.
Die?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that one, they're stabilizing it using oracles of price data from the real world.
Yeah.
And they're specifically stabilizing it against the dollar. So if something happens to the dollar, this coin is also, ultimately going to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think it would take for a cryptocurrency to be stable with respect to the goods that people ordinarily buy? Like what we normally think of as a stable currency that's not just piggybacking on the stability of another currency that's already stable, like the dollar.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's like asking you, right, what is your unit of exchange when your current unit of exchange goes away, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Almost. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do think that like bringing in some of my other beliefs about cryptocurrencies and the system now, that like at some point there's going to have to be sort of like care for other human beings and sort of a social movement behind what these currencies are that we use, if we're really actually detaching them from sort of traditional state governments. And that I would hope like sort of like personal trust relationships and being able to, like say I trust you, and like, by me establishing these just like very local small trust relationships that, we see that there's organizations that develop of these sorts of relationships that can exchange with each other, because sort of all they have to do is like trust the people that they love. But that's like
So I'm not making the connection between that and a stable value for the currency, because like Alex's question to me suggested, like, let's say everybody has social welfare in mind.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to use this as a currency, then it's in everybody's benefit to have it have a stable value. But there's still this question of like, how do you achieve that? Right? Like, which is a question of how monetary policy works, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if people even really know that much. I don't know that much, but like about how the U.S. dollar is kept stable. But the question would be like, how would you keep a different currency stable? Right? Yeah. Would you appoint like a government basically and have them do it, or is there another way to do it?
Yeah, you could. I think part of the reason I'm thinking what I'm thinking is because just my involvement with the Circles folks right now,
Okay,
and the
yeah.
experiment that they want to have is that each person sort of generates their own currency, and also kind of like defines the rules of that currency, like how much there is in a given point. And then that's like worth nothing on its own, but if you have other people saying like I know you, I trust you, like,
right.
You could say you are worth, $800 million tomorrow, but
right.
like, I don't believe you'll do that because I know that you sort of believe in these rules that are good for society. So I establish a trust relationship with you, and that through that, in the Circle's mindset, that what that trust relationship does is it allows you to exchange your currency for my currency at some sort of ratio, up to some certain amount, maybe. The idea being that, like, sort of I am betting my purchasing power, like, on your trustworthiness, and that through that, if there is some sort of stable relationships that can emerge, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in something that is a little bit more like bottom up in terms of defining these value and exchange rates instead of like top down.
That's interesting. Yeah. It helps me understand how like my personal credit, in a way you could think of it as, like the trustworthiness that I have would translate into some value. But I'm still struggling, like, if you take the system as a whole and you need a standard unit of value across the system, which for a large scale trade it seems like you would. How would that emerge, and how would that be stable? Does that make sense? I don't know if you can help me. I'm having trouble going from those to the big picture.
I think the question is, if currency is a standard unit of value on which we all coordinate in order to be able to trade with each other, how can it work with multiple different people each having currencies of different values? So The article we read is actually a blog post from the Union Square Ventures blog by Dani Grant. It's an overview of blockchain-based universal basic income projects. And they have a part on Circles. I'm just going to read really quick. On Circles, each new participant is issued UBI payouts in their own personal currency.
That's what you were describing.
That currency is not worth anything because no one agrees to exchange it yet. To make their account balance worth something, Circles participants need to trust each other's currencies by being willing to exchange them. And then from the Circles documentation, the value of a specific personal currency is a measure of how many other accounts trust it. So yeah, I don't. Do you feel like these are accurate? What I just read.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, I think that second sentence is speculation, right?
Yeah.
It's relative.
The second sentence being
the one that you have highlighted
Oh,
right
okay,
now,
yeah.
right? From what perspective, right? The value. Are we looking at value of this person? Like certainly, you know, if you have more people trusting you, then there are more people that say you have value. But yeah, I think it is sort of this like attempts to be this sort of self-policing system in which people state their value. Other people say they agree or disagree with that value, and that is sort of what creates the exchange rates, right? And like, you know, if you're sort of a few trust hops removed from my network, right? Like I could potentially calculate, like, you know, what it would take for me and you to transact with each other, right? Now we'd probably have to, since you don't immediately trust me, but we can trust each other through some other people. You know, that like if there's you know exchange rates along that route, you know, then I can evaluate my currency's value against your currency's value.
Well, like I was thinking, I mean, so international currencies can exchange, and you could find a common exchange rate like through the US dollar or something like that, right? So you could do something like that here. You could have a common like currency that's like intermediating all the other currencies.
Yeah, but then the currency is now the dollar, and these other things aren't your currency.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
So what this reminds me of is like, and maybe this will resonate and maybe it won't, but it reminds me of how you talk about just like personal credit that isn't yet translated into like dollars, for example. So
Right.
Everybody has like a certain amount to which like their friends are willing to loan them money, right? Because they expect them to pay it back, like that kind of trust. Or like a bank is willing to loan them money, which, you know, involves some financial assets they have, but like some predictor variables, like about whether people of that type tend to pay things back and like that kind of stuff. So there's kind of like trust built into our current monetary system in a way that like in terms of what you can actually borrow. And that reminds me of this a lot.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's kind of like your personal currency is just a quantification of your credit.
Yeah. It's a UBI might be a bit of a misnomer. What they're trying to do is have some sort of universal values-based mutual credit exchanges.
Right.
I see.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. But anyway, I don't know if that connection seems kind of clear to me.
Yeah, so an interesting analogy is, you know, banking in the United States in the 19th century. Each bank would issue kind of its own banknotes, and people would value the banknotes differently depending on how well trusted the bank was.
That's interesting.
Or checks on accounts from different banks, you know,
Right.
depending on where you go, you might not get the same amount for that check because it's, you know, issued by a bank in California and you're trying to deposit it in Massachusetts or something like that. And one of the biggest kind of financial innovations of the 20th century was that, you know, by I think the 1920s or so, you know, a check, you know, written from an account in a bank in Massachusetts would be worth the same no matter what state you deposited it in or
Right.
cashed it in and that kind of thing. So there was kind of this like synchronization or stabilization across regions of how much the currency was worth. There was kind of this bringing together of, you know, a dollar in one place is the same as a dollar in another place. And that's something that's, you know, that kind of we moved towards as one of the innovations. And I'm wondering, so I wonder with something like Circles, if it took off, like would there be a similar kind of evolution where we come up with mechanisms for like I mean, it has like validator nodes. Am I using the terminology correctly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Jake's the expert, but I'm going to talk a little bit. And he can correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the idea with the validator nodes is that, I might not trust Bethany, but there's a validator node that I trust who trusts Bethany. It's Elizabeth. So I trust Elizabeth, and Elizabeth trusts Bethany. So there's kind of,
Right.
this, and Jake was talking about a little bit like this with the hops of the trust connections. If you have some people who are like I want to make it my business to be that trusted connection, bringing together multiple people, like I feel like there's kind of an incentive for that, and that in our economy is what we call a bank. So I wonder if you have this kind of explicit instantiation of everybody's credit, that you can kind of they have this explicit currency, but I wonder if it's really analogous to kind of the implicit credit that we have, and if the same kind of banking system wouldn't emerge on top of that or something similar. I don't know. Yeah, Richard.
To be quite honest, I don't see anything about cryptocurrencies besides they're just speculative. But
Right.
the way I see it is that the whole way that credit works is that you have the assets or the means through generating income through your job or whatever, or your dividends from your stocks or something, to be worthy or whatever of someone loaning you some money. But I don't see how that would work with the circles or whatever.
I had a thought maybe
Yeah, go ahead.
related to that. So I was trying to think about this, and I was thinking about how I speak to Alex most about this kind of stuff, but you talk about credit as money, right?
Yes.
And I was wondering if there are various, so to know how much credit someone should have, or how much you can trust someone, you need certain information about them. And right now there are certain kinds of information that banks can collect, statistical variables and assets and that kind of thing. But I wonder if your friends know additional information that would basically be able to give you more credit, in the sense that people can learn that you're actually more trustworthy than they would be able to know otherwise.
Sure.
And if that's kind of part of what something like this is doing in terms of creating money, it's actually just giving people the information to know that they can trust you to give you money.
Yeah, and this is why some people can't get a loan from the bank and they borrow from their family or their friends.
Right,
instead.
exactly.
That's
It's kind
what
of
that is.
turning that into a broader system.
Yeah.
And there are
I don't know if that
startups that
relates
are
to that.
trying to, facilitate that kind of thing.
Right.
Raising money by getting a bunch of little loans from your social network.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Crowdfunding and
And
microloans.
I wonder if on average adding this kind of information would increase credit or not, because you could imagine it would give you just as much information not to trust people and not to give them money as it would to trust people and different people in different situations. Or you could imagine that on balance actually we're able to trust people more somehow, and it would increase credit across the board.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky because the overall volume of credit in the economy is kind of controlled by monetary policy. So the Fed says,
Into dollars, though.
Yeah. So the Fed says, hey, there's not enough lending going on and consumer spending is too low. We're going to tweak that and increase the amount of consumer spending by lowering interest rates to make it easier for people to borrow and that kind of thing.
I think that's kind of a separate point that I was trying to make. I mean, it may in practice relate to what you could actually do, but there was a separate question I had, which is basically are we unable to lend as much as we'd want to just based on lack of information about whether people are trustworthy enough?
Right. So you could maybe have more information and then have more efficient lending. So maybe instead of more money going to the same people when the Fed lowers interest rates, or you have it more evenly distributed, or maybe less evenly distributed, because now you really know that you don't want to give this loan.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting question. I mean, if you add
this.
this social information, what ends up happening to the pattern of where you would want to who you'd want to lend money to?
It's tricky. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think more than just the social information that you're doing too. I think we also get a chance to say how much we have a chance to exchange and change the norms around how much we share with other people.
I see.
And I think that's more where it's
Can
hoping
you say
to
more?
make
Can you say
innovation.
more about that?
Yeah, I think when it's a circles is sort of like we're getting into it. We're talking about how it's like sort of mutual credit exchange system between two people, but it sort of like hides that fact a little bit in the fact that like when we make an exchange, right? Like I'm still getting your currency in exchange for my currency, so like my balances don't really go down.
Why are we changing currencies?
Oh, so if you want to spend, so my trust relationship with you, if you're trying to spend with someone who trusts me, the way you do that, if that person doesn't trust you, is that my trust relationship enables you to like reach into my pockets and take out some of my currency if you put some of your
I
currency
trade
in there.
currency with you and then use it to buy raisins for
Exactly.
someone or something. Okay.
Yeah, and it's not that you like buying my currency; it's
I understand.
because
We're exchanging it. And how do we know the exchange rate?
So that's encoded in whatever contract I have. It's encoded in whatever this trust relationship is that's pointing to you.
Okay, gotcha.
Right now, I think like just like
In the
for
white
pilot-
paper, it says 1-to-1.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Right now, yeah.
Okay.
So I think
But all this stuff could be changed.
right.
Yeah,
I
I
think
see.
we can't prevent people from not doing 1-to-1, and in the initial smart contracts.
Okay. So then how would that change? I'm interested in like how you think that would change the norms of like how much I'm. Can you spell that out?
Yeah. So I think like one of the values that Circles is sort of like pushing out there is that like currency is generated by trust. You trust this. You might trust this person who's like poor and on the streets and they're a loved one, but like no one's giving them loans and they're like this sort of like there's difficulties around the social norms of actually sharing with them and like giving money. So I think it's really by saying that like currency comes from trust. Hey, here's a system where you can like put in all your friends that you trust and you can sort of like exchange with each other. But that sort of is encouraging. I'm not necessarily maybe going to look at my friend and be like, is this trust relationship's going to like advantage me and can I make interest off you in the long term? But you're more looking at like, is this a person that deserves, sort of whatever income this app is trying to give out?
So, let me say one more thing. So it sounds like Circles might think of trust differently than I was using the term.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I was using the term the way that maybe like a bank would use it. Like do you trust the person to like, if they ever had to like cash out or something like that, would you trust them to be able to do that? It sounds like you are expecting people to maybe use it in a different kind of way. Like, just do I kind of want them to have money or something like that?
Yeah. I think the trust that you're giving out here, because you're not actually like putting any of your like current value into it, because like starting out these things like already have no value.
Yeah.
The trust is one in like the idea of this sort of like ground up value based economic system, just in general, and like those rules.
Right.
And then
Specifically that it has universal basic income kind of
built in. Yep. And then also the trust that the person that you're like signing up as you trust like isn't going to create 10 different accounts.
I see. Oh, right. That there'll be a unique account and stuff like that.
They're not cheating the system.
Yeah. And that they're not going to and the other they're not cheating the system, and they're not going to like you have this ability to exchange your currency for my currency, that they're not going to just like take out all of your currency, spend it somewhere, and then create a new account and like not try to interact with you.
Gotcha.
They're not going to like burn the bridges.
Right, but because you're starting a whole new currency, it's not going to have that much to do with like their existing ability to pay things back in dollars in the world. It just has to do with whether they would like cheat this system and stuff like that. That's helpful. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
In thinking about this stuff, I felt like often, or in this blog post, some distinctions don't get made in these conversations about blockchain or cryptocurrency that I think would be helpful for this discussion to be. And I think one is, I mean, it's very salient that it's the prices going up and down and people are using it for speculation and trying to make money. But anyway, I think one thing is, most of these things, circles, a lot of these things, you wouldn't have to do it on the blockchain. You could just say, I am, I'm setting up this website. You can create an account. You can establish these trust relationships. and it's the thing that the blockchain enables specifically is that is decentralized, right? Like you don't have to trust me, the guy who set up the website, that, you know what I mean? There are different kinds of, there's a different structure of like who you're trusting to do what.
Right.
To me, that's like the most unique thing about blockchain, cryptocurrency.
Could you say that again, please?
So circles, as it's
Yeah.
described here,
Yes.
or any of these other schemes, could be implemented without a blockchain, right? Someone could set up a website and say, you know, register your account, you'll get tokens,
PayPal.
you can use this app. Yeah, right. And so none of, like, the details of all the rules of these things don't rely on the blockchain, really. The thing that the blockchain, the difference that the blockchain makes is that you don't have to trust, you know, PayPal or the guy who set up this website. You do have to maybe trust that this, you know, that enough people are going to be interested in the system to keep it up and running, that there'll be enough nodes in the network. I mean, I'm not saying you don't have to trust anything or that it's foolproof, but it's a different relationship with the person,
Right.
the people who are setting it up. That's one thing. And then to me, another thing is, and maybe, and I have a really specific example that maybe that I've been, this comes to my mind a couple times, and that is that it also, so it's, and I think this is a distinct thing. It's like a set of open source software resources and tools, and so, which I think can facilitate experimentation. And I like one of the example that's been on my mind is has to do with this people on the internet. I don't know if you've heard about this cool project Gresham that I've read about on the internet. But you know, and I spent some time kind of thinking about that and how it worked, and you know, so as it's proposed or outlined, you know, there are all these choices that are going to have to be made. Like, who is going to get allowed to register first and participate, and like,
Right.
where's that going to be? What are the merchants going to be, right? But if you could make, you know, a Gresham that ran on Ethereum, and then like some guys up in Burlington could be like, okay, we're going to start one up, and we're going to do it with these people in this neighborhood, and then some guys in Santa Cruz might be like, we're going to do it, but we're going to, you know, we're going to build it around this group, this community that's like really committed to the idea. Like one group might try to set it up based on we're going to raise a lot of money so that we have a big fund backing it up. That'll give people confidence. And other people might say we're going to rely on like the commitment of the people who are
Right.
nucleating it.
So you're saying make the code open source, and then people would have to raise their own money or something like that? Is that?
Yeah, right.
Sorry,
Or,
I
yeah,
didn't
and
mean to cut you off.
different choices of communities, or you know, maybe, you know, in, you know, it would like be a great fit with Laos or something, right? For whatever reason that we don't,
Yeah,
that we
Yeah.
can't see.
that's cool.
So that's just that would right, and that also wouldn't require a blockchain. That
Right.
might just be
Right.
open source.
Right.
Yeah.
But the so maybe the cool thing about the blockchain is because it's decentralized. If the one in Burlington really kind of took off, and then you're someone who's like always going back and forth between Burlington and Cambridge, and there's one in Cambridge, then, you know, if maybe those networks grow and you get to a point where there's some question like, is this guy getting two basic incomes because he's part of the Cambridge one and the Burlington one, right? If they grow to the point where they start merging, then you would have, you know, there could be issues. It wouldn't be the only way, right? You could, those two groups could sort of have a summit and a kind of merger negotiation and merge. But that, you know, I think the idea of circles, I think of circles in Gresham as being like very, you know, having a lot of parallels. And I think the idea of circles is that built into the sort of design and infrastructure is the seamlessness of that things nucleating in parallel, growing, and if hopefully merging.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Richard.
You were talking before about having verifiers or whatever. Well, 15 years ago, I went to my first travel abroad to Germany and Austria. I didn't know anything about, how I was supposed to exchange the money or anything like that. So I went to a money changer and they had these really bad exchange rates. And so I, exchanged dollars with them. And then I, heard from other people that you can just use your credit card and get cash back or something. So the credit card would have a much better exchange rate because they do have exchange so much more currency. But if you could have a central verifier that you would you could sort of like a credit agency or whatever, and that the money would go through them instead of the third person, like you were saying, then that they would get a piece of the 1% or something like that. Then that might make the system more fluid or something. Does that make any sort of sense?
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility. But these sorts of things would get set up. Yeah.
Yeah, so the decentralized nature of cryptocurrency is interesting because there's a very specific part of it that's decentralized, and that has to do with the fundamental units of the currency being stable and transactions being valid and stuff like that. So it's kind of like it has this fundamental property of stability, and in that way it's a lot like gold. So the decentralization is kind of analogous, or the integrity that is achieved through the decentralization is analogous to like the atomic structure of gold. You can't change it. But the thing is, when we used gold as money, we had these credit structures emerge on top of it. Through banking and credit and all of that, and we had central banking emerge. Still, we were doing things like having a gold standard, and we had central authorities managing monetary policy. So, we can talk about like the fundamental building blocks of the currency being uncorruptible by a central organization, but that doesn't stop the usage of the currency itself from being managed centrally. And I don't know that I've seen a cryptocurrency that could somehow prevent this from happening. And I don't know that there is a way to prevent this from happening.
Prevent the emergence of a manager.
Of a central bank managing monetary policy and controlling the prices of the currency and all of that. Yeah. I don't know that
by
yeah.
selective purchase and sale of the cryptocurrency?
Or controlling...
like Hunt cornering the silver market before he got clobbered.
Sure. Or by just managing the amount of credit in the system. So, if people are trading...
Credit created in the cryptocurrency?
Sure. So you can imagine a gold standard where we're trading little certificates that are IOUs for gold. You can imagine a Bitcoin standard where we're trading little certificates that are IOUs for Bitcoin.
Why wouldn't you just trade the Bitcoin?
Because there's not enough Bitcoin.
Then the value would go up.
The value would go up?
Of the Bitcoin. In other words, so what you're suggesting is that somebody needs to purchase Bitcoin for some purpose.
No, I think if you trust the IOU. So when we had a gold standard, the dollar IOU notes traded at par with gold, even though there was way more than there was gold backing it up. So that actually directly affected the price of gold because people thought of them as equivalent. There's no reason why that wouldn't also happen with Bitcoin, right?
What?
You can think of it as off-chain transactions.
Happen because, as you explained earlier, there is a fixed number of Bitcoin that can be mined, and I'm not technical in like how long it's going to take to mine those, and I know we're using a lot of electricity. There's a theoretical limit to the amount of electricity that limits the amount of cryptocurrency, when you get into some of these details. But
yeah, the value of gold didn't change only because we were continually mining more of it. it changed because we were creating virtual gold on top of that gold, and we can create virtual bitcoins. Like Bethany can say, okay, I owe you 10 bitcoins, and now in my mind, on my little balance sheet that exists inside my head, I can have 10 bitcoins due from Bethany as an asset, and I have 10 bitcoins, and meanwhile she spends it, and I feel like I have it. I behave as if I have it, and that affects the price of bitcoins. Like, this is how credit works. Does that make any sense?
It makes sense. When I think about cryptocurrencies, I think about so there is artificial, I'll call it artificial scarcity, but it's sort of a feature of something that has value where in trading, so it has a value as a surrogate for trading something else of value, a currency, right, money, that there is this element of scarcity, like a either known amount or a known rate of change of amount that is a part feature of that thing serving as a currency or as a money. And so, a cryptocurrency, if I could myself, through mining, double, triple, quintuple the worldwide known amount of any given cryptocurrency, well, it wouldn't be very much use as a currency because you could just make so much of it so fast. But you can't do that with gold. You can't do that necessarily with other precious metals that have traditionally, at times in history, been used to peg a paper currency or not, or coinage and this sort of thing. And so I guess what I'm saying is I don't know that I could envision cryptocurrency as not being exactly like a currency that is or is not pegged to gold, that's pegged to the dollar, that's free floating fiat currency. You know what I mean? I could envision there would be some differences, and those differences might be kind of salient.
Yeah. And I would say you can do that with gold. You can multiply the amount of gold through credit, through like people saying, I trust this bank to pay me gold on demand. So now I've got these bank deposits that I treat as if they're gold. They're worth just.
This isn't speculation. Like this is history.
This is what we do, right? This is how it works.
This is what happened on the gold standard.
And there's nothing to stop that from happening with Bitcoin too, or with any cryptocurrency. Like, this is credit.
Right. So I think the thing that is a little bit different though is that we, like, with the base platform of the cryptocurrency, like, we're able to create the rules for these institutions that generate credit, and we're able to sort of like define those and standardize those in ways that we can like explicitly say we trust the rules of this given system, right? Whereas when you go to a bank to get a loan, right, you're saying in some sense like, I trust this bank, right? But I don't really know, like, outside of like federal laws and stuff, like what that bank is good for, and right, there 2008 bailouts, all that stuff, like, those the rules that were sort of like generating this credit were maybe a little bit bent, maybe, but they weren't like explicit, right? They're kind of bound to change by federal policy changes. Right?
Yeah, by saying that you trust the bank, if the bank is insured by the government, you're saying you trust the government.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, I mean, what you were saying before sort of was kind of pointing in the direction of like, you could have some currency on the Ethereum blockchain that had a sort of equivalent of a Federal Reserve, and you could have a million different ways of selecting who had the authority to make the decisions of that body. To me, I think maybe the big difference is that, like, when you're doing that with real people and real institutions, it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to experiment with that, right? There can only really be one Federal Reserve, and like a bank. Traditionally, anyway, they've been like big brick and mortar buildings with paying hundreds of salaries, right? But these are just code. You can like clone a repository and like change it and do an experiment. I mean, like I think to me that's like there's not necessarily a fundamental difference in how it works, but there's just a giant difference in how easily it can be changed and experimented with and
What do you think about that?
innovated.
I mean, I think that's right. I think, like it can't be denied that the whole cryptocurrency thing has brought on a wave of experimentation and people who are just interested in like learning about this stuff and understanding this stuff. It's like that's huge. And I think
And
it's
by
a
the
good
way,
thing.
for all of those interested in monetary policy, please check out Money and Banking by Prime Erling on Coursera.
Yeah.
Which we haven't pitched for a couple of these.
We haven't brought that up in a few weeks.
But it's really good. I mean, on these
The
kinds
Money
of
and Banking
topics.
course on
Yeah.
Coursera, and he does some reading from this book as well. And I recommend this book if you really want to understand money deeply. And I would say that you can't understand basic income without understanding money. So
Is the
this is a
history
book
of
to
money
read.
and banking? Is that what
It has a little history
Money
in
and
it.
Banking.
Yeah.
It's the economics of money and banking. But
Economics.
he is a historian, and he does talk a lot about the history, and he goes back into 19th century and how central banking emerged and that kind of stuff. It's really cool. So I wanted to speak to Jake's point about how if you have the blockchain, you can decide how these institutions work. But what if I come along, I'm just me, and I see people doing all this stuff on the blockchain, and I say, hey, you guys, that's great, but I can offer you a better deal than some of these institutions. What's to stop me from doing that? And then, institutions can emerge that use this kind of blockchain-based currency, but that aren't on the blockchain themselves.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they certainly could.
But when you say on the blockchain, I mean, I may use Bitcoin, but me is not on the blockchain. The Bitcoin
Right.
is
So
I think
on the
we're sort of,
blockchain, kind
I think we're projecting into the future when like Ethereum and these blockchains that allow more than just simple exchanges of balances. Or,
which is already happening.
Right.
So-
But it's not very well developed.
when I'm thinking on the blockchain, when I say that, what I'm imagining in my head is I'm imagining gold and like the atoms of gold that make up like a nugget of gold, and like these are the laws of physics that rule the gold, right? But I can come in and without changing the physical properties of gold, I can say I'm offering to trade gold in this way. I can create institutions that manage the flow of gold and who's able to borrow gold and lend like all that kind of stuff. And so that's what I'm thinking when I'm saying an institution comes in outside the blockchain. Like they're not changing the property of gold, but they're changing the way we use it in our society.
It could be either like on the Ethereum blockchain as smart contracts, or like you're saying, it could just be a separate thing.
Right.
I do think that the stuff that exists like as code or smart contracts or as these like groups, I think that by the nature of them that they will be competitive and will probably be offering better deals than our current modern day. Like
So that's a good
institutions.
answer. Yeah.
What do you mean by a better deal?
By better interest rates on loans, just because they're operating at just like a completely different scale, and then also have these sort of like community values built in, and that like if you have one institution that is like the developer of it is like pulling off a certain percentage off the top of every transaction that happens, like in this sort of like
So he's saying
it's really easy to copy that and create those rates.
So you're saying there's no kind of like, I'm me, there's no profitable opportunity for me to come in, because if I were to offer a better deal, then I wouldn't be profiting anymore.
Right.
So the blockchain institutions would win out, and yeah. I think that's a good answer. I don't know if I have the faith that the blockchain institutions are going to be that good.
Sure.
Also, what they
yeah.
could be offering would be something other than a better interest rate. It could be like something that makes things easier or more stable or faster or right.
The blockchain institutions?
Like the extra blockchain institution could be competing on a dimension other than interest price.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense? So
Yeah, yeah,
maybe
yeah.
maybe they're not going to be like able to do better than that, but maybe they
Are you saying that there would be a
Yeah.
proliferation of currencies?
I'm not saying that.
I
But I think Jake
does
is,
this
you know,
already-
that's part of what
I think
circles is.
there's
Yeah,
an
go ahead.
example of this that already exists with like aren't there ways that you can trade Bitcoin faster and then it only like eventually turns back into the like actual. So this is an example of something that like it's a trade off of the blockchain and then it only eventually circles back onto it, right? So that's the kind of thing that we were talking about. Like I forget who asked that question. Was it you? That like you have these extra institutions that are basically using referencing the original thing like Bitcoin, but they're not actually tied to the blockchain in the same way. They can, for example, make trades a lot faster, something like that.
Or they're on a side chain.
Side chain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what they call it sometimes.
I see. Gotcha.
Like
Like a bank
in the way you
trading
think of
IOUs instead of.
synthetic, like CDOs as a synthetic.
Well, I think
Or
it's
you could have the analogy of like an off-balance sheet instrument. Like you have, like a interest rate swap or something like that, where you could have implemented this in terms of a bunch of different loans going in different directions at different interest rates, but now it's just this one thing, and you've kind of collapsed, that kind of thing. Balance sheet. Yeah.
I'd be really interested and excited to see the day that like some sort of secondary institution like the one that you're talking, lending institution like the one you're talking about, that like a whole blockchain community decides to change their rules to bail them out because of improper decisions they made. Like that is sort of a feasible thing, but
Well, to bring back the analogy of gold, if the property, you don't have to change the properties of gold, like the gold community, those little atoms don't have to agree to bail anyone out in the economy, but if you've got these institutions can bail the economy out.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like you'd have to get everyone to agree, everyone in all the nodes or something to agree to change
Right.
something.
You're actually
Yeah.
you're changing to something different, right? So in that you're changing to a new currency, right, in that standpoint.
Almost, yeah. It's like you've rather than Bitcoin being the currency, it's a Bitcoin standard being the currency.
Yeah.
And then that could, of course, evolve into a fiat currency again once you realize that the Bitcoin standard is too restrictive and you need, the money supply to adjust to changes in the economy and that kind of thing. And that kind of leads to my next question, which is, how do you, like, if I get that you can write new smart contracts and stuff like that, but there's a lot of the monetary policy of the currency is baked in. How would you have institutions that are on the blockchain that compete with a real world institution that's able to see how the economy is changing and react as it changes and adjust their policy based on kind of new realities? Maybe we get a lot more productive, or there's more different types of technology and different there's different prices to think about. People start buying different things, so now you have to think about keeping your currency stable in terms of squibbits, which never existed before, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, you can modify, like, these structures are like just as flexible, I think, as other structures, right? So you can you can define at the beginning, right? You can and have a community surrounded around, like, here are the levers that you can pull for different monetary policy, and here's exactly how they work, and they can be a little bit different than. They can be those levers that you can pull can actually like look a bit different than the sorts of levers that the Fed has.
Sure.
Because of where the balances are stored and all that, and the types of information that you have about transaction history that's also present there, and open to the public. But there's no reason that, right, you couldn't have certain people who are elected to make certain changes to certain parameters, just sort of like you have today.
So then a question is, don't you at that point have centralized control over the monetary policy?
Yeah. So there's, I think it's deciding which these things, like cryptocurrencies in general, could like look exactly the same as the modern banking system, but there are as the modern banking system. with the same sorts of people in control, same balance, all of that. But I think it gives us an opportunity to sort of like express like, okay, maybe there's centralized control over these sections, but not these sections, and allows you to sort of like the expressivity of these rules. That I really hope that, you know, we can sort of like come together and say like, here are some rules that we believe in, and like here are some like fundamental values, like something like a universal basic income that we believe in, and here's how we want to bake it into our system, and you know, people can come and say like, great, we're behind your vision, we're behind how you are going about executing your vision, and so like we're buying in, and because we're buying in, like that value is created. But yeah, I think that there are pressures, there are tons of pressures to create things, and this is a huge problem. I think a lot of current cryptocurrency projects is that like they start out with sort of like these like decentralized goals, end up creating something that looks, you know, kind of like the system that we have today, central banking system that we have today. And yeah, maybe that is just like a sort of fundamental fact of us exchanging money, and this is the most efficient way. But I do think that the technology is unlocking something a little bit different.
I'm curious, like what maybe going around and seeing what different people think are like the pros and cons of having a UBI and a cryptocurrency, since this is like a UBI and cryptocurrency discussion versus
Sure,
like
yeah.
the dollar or something else.
Yeah, let's do that, and then we can maybe get to some quotes from the article.
Okay, yeah, sure.
All right, do you want to start? We'll go clockwise this time.
So and I want to say, as I listened to most of our discussion, we're sort of talking cryptocurrency and not so much UBI, or you know, and so I have difficulty saying, you know, what are my thoughts cryptocurrency vis-a-vis UBI, and my thought is, if we're talking, and this is my limited understanding, if we're talking just cryptocurrency, I'm kind of agnostic to what you pay the UBI in, or you know, whatever. If you're talking about Ethereum and some of these other, what I consider, they're beyond cryptocurrency. They're beyond just a currency. It's a way of transacting stuff. I'll just, you know, I'll leave it real general because it's Ethereum. Or something. It's like, right? So anyway, I guess the bottom line is, to me, a bit of UBI, you have cryptocurrencies, and really doesn't, to me, it doesn't really matter that much what you pay it in, but it would be the same consideration that you might give to any currency, which is issues of trust and you know, who controls the supply, if it is a currency for which you can alter the supply, and all the other things that you think of in perhaps in a modern economy.
Okay. Richard.
To be quite honest, I don't really see the point of cryptocurrencies. I could just think of other countries. They have their post offices are allowed to be banks as well, and you can just have direct deposit into the bank, and you can like connect the post office to like your local bank, the account, and so you can access your money through that as well. You could just do something like that, direct deposit. I don't know. And then everyone could have their own account via the post office.
True.
Postal banking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Elizabeth.
I came in late, so I feel like I missed some like hopeful, potentially introductory portions of this. So I didn't get like sort of intro, like the specifics of my sort of general stance on like cryptocurrency from like the little that I understand. I'm like, so you're like churning a lot of computer power for, I'm not really sure what the point. So I have sort of a low key like hostility to like cryptocurrency to start with, and it feels like, okay, you're just churning a lot of like electricity, which is really not great for. I'm not clear sort of how scalable that is. That if you're creating this like new currency that you're going to do a UBI in, like okay, like if it's in like dollars, like that, there's a lot of those. Those are in circulation. That's a thing that you can functionally do, and I'm not sure how scalable cryptocurrency is. But again, like I missed the introductory part of this, and certainly as like you had said, you could do a sort of credit situation where even if there's a finite supply, if I like say, oh Bethany, I owe you 10 whatever's, like we can function as if that's true.
Right.
But it, especially with a bunch of like competing systems, it feels like I'm not sure how scalable it is to make it like a functional UBI as opposed to like a pet project in like a small community.
So that's a good answer, and I don't think you missed anything that would have cleared any of that up.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, Nick, go ahead.
I guess I'm very, I'm kind of enamored of the idea that it's something that people could, a community of people could just decide to do, and the idea of waiting for it to happen like nationwide in dollars. I mean, I think that would actually probably be preferable in many ways, but it seems the possibility seems very remote to me, and so to me it's energizing to think that there are tools that are potentially empowering people to just do that on their own, like a community of people to do that on their own, in a way where it might, could like take off and spread.
Yeah. Jake.
Yeah, I think why I get really excited about this stuff is similar to why you do, I think, and I think I haven't met sort of such a large community of people before, or people who are thinking about sort of the origins of money, of alternatives to the current economic and monetary systems, and it just like being around that sort of community and around these ideas, I think has a lot of value and is bringing some interesting conversations to the table. And I do really think that on this sort of like small scale growing up, that we'll be able to sort of redefine what it means to transact with each other, what it means to have like an income, to value each other, to take care of each other, and that these systems, and that designing new economic systems is what's going to allow us to do that. And this seems like it's the biggest new sort of economic system design space that you don't have to go through politics or any of this other stuff. You can just sort of get a group of friends together and do it. But that group of friends can create a system that's replicable on a global scale.
Cool. Bethany.
Yeah, so I think some conceivable, I don't know, so what's cryptocurrency? Can I speak to like digital currency in general?
Sure.
I might do that because I think that's more applicable to what I want to say. So I think that some advantages are like there are innovations you can have with a digital currency that's not at least typically tied to something material in the world, like paper. Like, so for example, your idea has that kind of innovation where something automatically converts to a different currency after a certain amount of time. Like a paper dollar can't do that. So if that was a really important part of your paper dollars are important, then you're not going to do that. And I'm sure there are a bunch of other interesting innovations that like I haven't thought about that being more digitally, primarily a digital currency would allow you to do. So I think that's one. Another possibility I could see, like in theory, although I don't think this applies to us in practice, would be like if you really have a totally, if you have better institutions outside of the government than inside of the government, and by that I mean like you have a terribly corrupt, totally dysfunctional government, but for whatever reason have like really good social institutions outside of the government, then I could imagine that like this kind of thing would be particularly important. Like you could basically reinvent the wheel outside of the corrupt government if you had to, or if you could do that, I could see value to that in those like political circumstances. The downsides I see are like, it does seem like there's, and this is something I appreciate a little bit from like the money and banking class and talking to you, like there's been a lot of time and a lot of development of pretty strong, pretty impressive economic institutions. And so there could be like a problem to you could just end up taking extra time for no reason, sort of reinventing the wheel, and getting to the point, like you were saying, where you finally have the institutions kind of doing a good job at what was already happening, in the U.S. dollar or whatever anyway. So I guess that's the downside. But I do agree with a lot of people that what you're trying to do is sidestep politics for some of the reasons that have been brought up. Like sometimes the politics are kind of slow and sticky and not likely to do kind of the thing that somebody wants to do. So I see that advantage too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, I think we do have pretty good institutions here in the United States, at least for now. But there are plenty of places in the world that don't.
Right.
And I think some of these places, places like Venezuela or Argentina or places that have, maybe some of the countries in Africa that have, that don't have a strong currency that they use in their economy, they're able to benefit from using Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin is probably a really terrible currency for these economies. It's just not quite as terrible as the one the government's trying to put forward. And as far as cryptocurrency and UBI goes, I get the sense that so there's a lot of people who think a lot about cryptocurrency, and there's a lot of people who think a lot about basic income, and then there's a small group of people who have seen, wow, these cryptocurrencies emerged, and they kind of created money out of nothing. Is there a way we can kind of harness that and use that to distribute a basic income? And this is kind of the philosophy I see with some of the projects, like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Manna. It's one of the basic income cryptocurrency projects. And, there's another one called Raha that's pretty new this year. And I actually talked to those guys a couple months ago. And, they're thinking, they're thinking, okay, there are these experts who've figured out, kind of these mechanisms for creating new money, and now we can use that to provide a basic income. But I'm not sure it quite works that way, and I think part of the problem is that the Book of Satoshi is basically a compendium of every public thing that Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, ever publicly wrote. So from looking at this book myself, he appears to be really smart about a lot of things, but I don't think he understands how money works or what money is. And this is evidenced by him saying things like, what if we lived in a world where the value of our currency was always going up? And of course, the answer to that question is, then that's not a currency anymore, and you're going to find something stable to use as your currency, because this currency needs to be kind of a standard, stable unit of value. And if you have, currency isn't the thing you save, it's the thing you spend. If you want to save money, you buy some kind of asset that's expected to go up in value over time. And maybe you're buying Bitcoin, and that's fine, but Bitcoin isn't a currency anymore if it's the thing you're saving your money in. And that's true of cryptocurrencies in general. People kind of buy them hoping they'll go up in value and stuff like that. That's not the behavior of a currency. The currency is the standard that we coordinate on in order to trade. So in terms of...
In a floating market world, would you still say that?
A floating market world where currencies float relative to each other? Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who speculate on currencies.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I would say that, each country is trying to set its own monetary policy and keep its prices relatively stable within its own economy. And then there are people betting on, price changes based on, or maybe they're doing carry trade. They're, borrowing in one currency and then, converting it back in order to make a profit because the interest rates are different in different countries. And, I think this is true even in that world where all this complicated stuff is happening. And I think some of that complicated stuff can actually help keep currency stable too, because, if a currency moves far away from, trading at an efficient level with another currency, then there's an arbitrage opportunity, and that can help move it closer together and all of that. So that's part of what maintains it. And even today, like recently, within the past 10 years or so, you're seeing a lot more cooperation between central banks. Like they're borrowing money from each other and stuff like this. So this is it's almost like it's almost like they're coordinating in such a way to bring the world's currencies together into one currency. I think for an efficient global market, you pretty much, if you want it to be maximally efficient, you want one standard that everyone in the world is coordinating on. So you'd want one kind of global currency. And we kind of actually do have that with kind of the dollar at the top of the hierarchy and other currencies trading in terms of the dollar, but we're not quite there yet. So yeah, I think that's true even in a world with floating currencies. And when you talk about basic income, the idea is that you want that to be the idea of basic income. What makes it possible is the fact. I mean, I think all basic income proponents believe this. We believe that the economy has the capacity to provide more for people, and it's not doing that. And if they had more money, then that could activate some of that capacity. And that's what makes basic income possible in the first place without, causing inflation or something like that. And in order to have a proper basic income, you'd want to pay it out in a proper currency and have it be like a steady value, kind of a steady amount that goes to everyone. So I like what Nick said about, having the opportunity to experiment and get around, the government and their institutions if you feel like you can do something better. I mean, anyone who's for UBI feels like we could be doing something better. So I also agree with Bethany that, the digital currency, having it be digital allows you to do things that you can't do with physical cash. But I also think most currency in the world is digital these days. Even our dollars are digital. Everyone's currency is digital. But what makes cryptocurrency special is this kind of decentralized nature with the blockchain and the mining and that kind of stuff. And you're kind of creating a new gold that way. But I don't know that built into that you can have the institutions necessary to keep a currency stable. I think those institutions would still have to come in on top of that, and then you end up having kind of a centralized control of the currency, central monetary policy, central banking. So then that kind of prompts the question: why did we do this whole decentralization thing in the first place? Maybe it was just a way to kind of like to move into something new, but then it evolves into what we already have, except maybe we fix the problems or something like that. We added a basic income, that kind of thing. Yeah. That was a long rant. Anyone have any thoughts about what I just said? Or we can start looking
Do you
at
want
the
to go to your
article more.
quote?
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead, Martin.
I mean, you made the comment creating a new gold, which is, to my way of thinking, exactly what a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin does.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's necessarily the history of it, but my sense is that was part of the motivation for developing Bitcoin, and that's why it has this terminal limit in the number of Bitcoin that can be mined, was just to kind of give it that characteristic. And so, historically, this gold standard or other standards, whatever, some would say, I guess we've been going off the gold standard since FDR. It's not as simple to say that Bretton Woods and Nixon took us off the gold standard. And my limited understanding of economics is that would be an oversimplification of what has really happened historically with the linkage of currencies, specifically the dollar in our case, the US case, linkage to some sort of precious metal, foundation, whatever you want to call it, right? So it's some sort of linkage. So it would be sort of a world going back to some semblance of a prior world, because you have this gold standard, or you have this cryptographically determined 21 million Bitcoin, right, kind of thing. What the implications of that are for basic income, that I'm not so sure of. And so you're making a choice, if you can sort of go the Bitcoin cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, you're actually making a choice to a currency that is pegged to a standard.
Yeah, I think that's right. You could try to pay out something like a basic income in anything. You could be like, okay, you get one car every 5 years or something like that, or you get 11 clams a day. But there's a reason why we want it in something that's kind of standard and tradable and fungible, and yeah. So here's a quote from the article. The development of cryptocurrency now gives us a way to implement a UBI in a global, trustless, and democratic way without the need for a government to implement it. So I think if you've gotten a cryptocurrency that's able to sustain a basic income, then you can do that in a way that is not limited by country borders, and I think that's important. I think that's something.
But only on the assumption that the cryptocurrency is accepted.
I mean, the assumption is that the cryptocurrency is actually worth something.
Well,
or I guess those two go hand in hand.
So in other words, if I have a barrel of oil, if the only way I'll give you that barrel of oil is for $100, and they have to be $100 US.
Right.
And if I need oil, whatever for my car, I'm not purchasing it in cryptocurrency. I'm using cryptocurrency to purchase dollars, and then taking the dollars and giving it to the smiling Russian with the barrel of oil.
Right.
And that's where the sort of the notion of need for a government, or without need for a government, only if the cryptocurrency is accepted. In all cases where the cryptocurrency is not accepted, some other currency is accepted for purchase, then that doesn't happen, at least not directly.
Yeah. And I think once the cryptocurrency is accepted enough that you can kind of trade it for a lot of different things, that implies that it has some kind of value, because people wouldn't be accepting it otherwise. So I think the two things, whether it's accepted and whether it has value, are kind of two sides of the same coin, almost. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense in that it's difficult to imagine a world in which you have a cryptocurrency that is not traded against other currencies.
Yeah, and it's difficult to imagine a world in which a cryptocurrency has value and you wouldn't, at least through trading it through the dollar, ultimately be able to buy your barrel of oil. Right.
But how many cryptocurrency units it would take to do that is floating.
Yeah, and if it's always changing, then that makes it harder to make the exchange, or it makes the exchange more expensive, because if you're trying to exchange for dollars and that rate is floating, then that's more risk that the exchange is taking on in order to fulfill that transaction.
But that is no different than pretty much the state of today. I mean, you have countries where they fix currency, and I remember going, 1-to-1 for East German mark versus West German mark. It was kind of a joke, because I would get 7 East German mark for each West German mark on the western side of Checkpoint Charlie, and then I would go in, and then I told you the story. I tried to buy the Rolex and explained to the woman, says, look, you just run up the street there and you can exchange my East German mark into West German mark if you want to, because the official exchange rate is 1-to-1. And then she explained, oh, but we're an international store. We only international. And I said, well, you just go right up the street there and take care of that. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't buy a Rolex that day.
Right. So there's the market rate, which might be different from some kind of official exchange rate. So I don't know. Does anyone else have anything to say about this particular quote or what we were just talking about?
So when they say cryptocurrency, does that essentially mean like any digital currency? Like, I admit that I don't really understand how cryptocurrency works, other than that you use a lot of electricity to generate things, and there's supposed to be something about trust. And I'm mostly but you're killing the planet, and I don't really understand why.
Yeah. Do you want to know more about how that works, actually, really quick?
Really quick. I was like, I don't want a long explanation, but really quick.
Yeah, so basically the idea is, how do you, so you want to keep track of a ledger of all the transactions that ever happened.
Yeah.
And how do you decide, what actually gets recorded on the ledger. And the idea is that you want everyone to agree, or you want there to be some kind of consensus on what transactions are valid. Now, what you could do is, if you imagine a room with 100 people, you have them all vote, like, yes, that one's valid, no, that one's not. But if you have an internet with an arbitrary number of computers, you don't know how many there are, and one person could, have 1 million computers. Should that person get 1 million votes? Probably not, because then they could just, ruin the whole thing, and everybody knows they can do that, so it's not going to work in the first place anyway.
Okay.
So the idea...
But actually,
yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I was just reading an article, and the concept of immutability, which we didn't really talk about when Nick, when you were sort of discussing it's a database and it's decentralized. But my understanding is that one of the key features of blockchain technology is immutability, and which I thought was like guaranteed, but now in reading there's what's called the 51-person attack, which is to your point. So to speak, if you control enough computers, 51, then you have voting rights, and you can vote what is in the block, which effectively allows you to change the block, because you change the block and then you vote that the block is valid.
Right. So I don't think what's special about the blockchain is immutability. You can have that in any database. What's special about the blockchain is that it's determined by this. I want to quickly finish this explanation.
Yeah.
It's determined by this voting mechanism, only you don't know how many people there are. If you had 100 trusted people with 100 trusted computers, it would be really easy to kind of come to a consensus. So instead of that, what they do is they say, prove to us that you've burned a certain amount of electricity, and then people get to vote based proportionally on how much electricity they've wasted. So if you've got X amount of electricity, if you put 100 computers in there, you're still wasting exactly the same amount of electricity. And the way they do this is they just make the computer solve a really hard problem where it's probabilistic. So the more electricity you waste, the faster you'll be able to come to a solution, and then whoever gets the solution is the one who gets to determine the truth of the value. So they're basically competing on wasting electricity in order to be able to vote. Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Richard.
John Oliver's explanation of it on Last Week Tonight was that before there was one major computer that kept all the transactions, but now that with the blockchain, there's hundreds of or thousands of computers that all have records of it. So you can compare, if someone falsifies one, you can compare that against all the other computers.
Yeah, not only that, but since each record in the blockchain, has a little nugget of information that's calculated based on the previous record in the blockchain. If you change that previous record, then it will no longer match the next record in the blockchain. So you could have one blockchain on your computer, and you could detect it being tampered with if someone tries to change one block. So if you want to change one block, you have to change all the blocks that come after it. So that's kind of what keeps it secure.
So initially competing to burn the most electricity, it wasn't done in a I hate the world way, right? Obviously.
Right. But given that that's how it has turned out,
right. It's awful. What people are sort of realizing now, and what most cryptocurrencies are trying to move towards today, is something called proof of stake. So that the burning electricity, proof of work, trying to move to proof of stake. So they realized that really the thing that we needed to sort of prevent against, and the thing that we needed to evaluate is the economic value that someone has spent in order to participate in this system, right? So they would need to spend, in order to get to have enough electricity and computers in order to really execute an attack on this network, is just billions and billions of dollars on the order of magnitude that it really doesn't make any sense for any one actor to do this. What's being realized is that in a proof of stake system, right, you have all this economic value that's being expressed in terms of the code that exists on the chain itself, right? Networks are there's this many Bitcoin worth this many US dollars, there's this much economic value. You can put up a portion of stake of Bitcoin itself, gain some sort of interest on that, and use the economic value as expressed in the network already in order to sort of like validate your transactions and not rely on this sort of like economic value that's expressed in terms of like energy and compute power. So that's the system that is like is being moved to when we're talking about like modern cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Richard.
A few years ago, I heard about you're being able to like donate your computer's unused processing power to like go through astronomical data or scientific data. Wouldn't that be a better use of the energy expended? You can use that energy expended to benefit society rather than just, oh, we're going to waste it going through some stupid equations that don't actually do anything.
Yeah.
There are different properties other than just wasting energy that are important for these results to have in order to be able to use them in this like sort of like lock and key fashion that those sorts of like questions don't, like solving those sorts of answers don't actually give you, right? So you need to be able to compute the result, and the result computation time needs to take a long time, but then to actually like check the result, it needs to be very fast, so that everyone else can sort of verify that you've done the work without sort of having to do all of that work themselves. So that's why some of these problems you're not able to develop a proof of work mining based on searching through astronomical data, for instance.
So I agree with you, Richard, that it's a better way to use your computing power, but you can't then also use it to do like a proof of work cryptocurrency. It would just be calculating the useful stuff. Yeah, which is fine, which is probably what you should be doing with your computing power, but it's not gonna work in like a cryptocurrency.
What was it? I didn't totally follow the proof of stake.
Yeah, so
Can you
I'll see if I
explain? Yeah.
can kind of rephrase it in my own words. So if you know that there's a certain amount of this cryptocurrency in existence, and then the individual computers on the network, each have some amount of that cryptocurrency, they can set aside some of that cryptocurrency, and we know what percentage of the total amount of cryptocurrency in existence they represent there. So then we can calculate the size of their vote. Is that an accurate description, Jake?
Sure. Yeah, and we
Yeah.
also have rules in place so that if they since we're giving the people with the stake the power to sort of like modify the ledger, if they modify it in a way that they double spend their coins or do any malicious thing, that like the network has rules to be able to remove everything that they put into that like staking contract. So they have the economic incentives essentially are aligned without having to rely on like money purchased on computers. It's money that is already in the network.
And so this is a little bit like boards, like you vote according to the amount of stocks you own in a company, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because you know how many shares are outstanding. Yeah. So then you know how many votes you get with your shares. Yeah.
Is the cost to mine a Bitcoin in terms of electricity in any way linked to the what do I want to call it? That a hacker would have to spend a similar amount of money in order to hack a block on the blockchain, which would then make it not cost effective for hackers to hack a block, because the economic value of the hacked block wouldn't necessarily exceed the cost to hack the block.
No, right. I mean, so if you all of a sudden are able to control the network, you're able to say whatever you want, right? So you could say that I have
But it's going to
tens
cost
of billions
you
of
that.
dollars, right? But
Right.
to hack it to say I have $1 more, or to hack it to say I have 100 billion more dollars, that there's no difference in how difficult that hack is.
So I think
But in order to conceptually to hack a block, you have to, so to speak, be the one who is the authoritative power, if you will, saying that the block is valid,
right.
which
So
gets into the voting thing, and that's
So it depends what you mean by hack a block. So what this mechanism does is it controls, or it determines who gets to add the next block. So there are rules that are built into the protocol that says what a block is supposed to look like. So
but
you can't
the
add
earlier
it.
block that you can't change. That's why I was bringing up immutability.
So the earlier block that you can't change has nothing to do with the decentralized blockchain stuff. It just has to do with the fact that each block has a hash pointer back to its previous block. So what that is it's just a piece of data that's calculated based on what the data is in the previous block. And if you change the data even one bit, then it's a completely different number, and there's no way to predict what that number is going to be, or how to create another
But what
previous.
creates the trust is that you know that happened.
You know that happened, yeah.
And that's what creates the whole trust
So you
in the
can't.
system.
This is so there's two different kinds of trust. There's the trust of immutability.
Right.
So this is something, it's just unhackable because it's cryptographically secure, and it has nothing to do with the wasting of energy or anything like that. And you just can't change a block back there, because then everyone would see that it's not consistent with the blocks around it. Now, for adding a new block onto the end of the chain, if you're already at the end of the chain and you want to add a new block, that's where the electricity comes in, and they use the voting based on the electricity.
So in my limited understanding, I'm thinking the electricity comes into mining the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What makes the Bitcoin a coin that then, once mined, cannot be just simply counterfeited is that it's recorded in the blockchain.
Yes. So if it's
So they're really two different things.
yes.
It's important that they coexist, and blockchain technology grew out of cryptocurrency, but it didn't have to. But historically, that's just kind of what happened. And now blockchain has other applications anywhere that you are looking for a distributed database that has immutability. And I know you say
So-
that any database is immutable, but I'm not.
It's
so
not that
sure
any database is
database
immutable. You'd have to have this functionality built into the database, but it doesn't
That's
have to have
security,
the blockchain.
not, at least the way I
Right.
think of it, having been responsible for databases, I was responsible for the security of those databases. And so I was using security approaches to creating immutability. Blockchain creates immutability via a mechanism that you could say overlaid on that can also be cryptography and encryption, and should be, but that isn't all that makes that block immutable. And in that sense, a blockchain, as thinking of as a database, is very different than a SQL database.
So, there's two questions,
Yeah.
right? When you're looking at like, given that I'm looking at a current view of history, how do I know that this is the correct view of history and not this whole other alternative like chain is the view of history?
Right.
And then there's like, how can I be ensured that this chain of history sort of like logically follows from itself, right?
Right.
Yeah, so I read this book. This is Designing Data-Intensive Applications. It doesn't really talk about blockchain, but a lot of the principles still apply. They do mention blockchain a little bit. They talk about consensus and how to achieve consensus in a distributed database and quorums and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot about this stuff because you've worked on databases before. But I found none of the stuff out there about blockchain was as informative to me about blockchain as this book about databases was. And I think, blockchain, what's special about blockchain isn't the immutability. What's special about it is because you can achieve that, like Git is immutable, right? You're familiar with Git, the version control system. So that uses
But I don't think it's immutable the way blockchain is immutable.
It's immutable exactly the same way in that it has hash pointers going back to each commit contains a hash pointer to the previous commit. So you can't go and change a previous commit without changing all the commits that come after it. So it's immutable in exactly the same way blockchain is. The difference with
Do you agree with that too?
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
the difference with Git is that you can decide to branch off any point in the history, and it's all valid. Sure, that's the version you want.
Right.
With blockchain, really you want kind of one authoritative block to be added each time to the chain. So the idea that you have to waste all this electricity to add blocks means that if you try to add a block further back in the chain and try to make that the authoritative chain, not only do you have to waste the electricity for that block, but you have to waste the electricity for all the blocks. For if you're 50 blocks back, you have to waste 50 blocks worth of electricity just to catch up. And everyone can see how long the chain is. So if they see, if you only get 20 blocks, they can see that your chain is still shorter than the main chain. So it really becomes infeasible after like maybe a couple of blocks for this kind of fork to be viable. And I think that's the main thing about blockchain, is just this kind of authoritative adding the blocks to the end, which you can get in a normal distributed database, as long as you decide that you want to trust certain nodes are not misbehaving. So I don't know if you guys have heard of the Stellar consensus protocol. Stellar is another. They call it a cryptocurrency, and they use the term blockchain, but it doesn't have this. It doesn't have this distributed trustless consensus mechanism. It's not trustless. Instead, each node is trusting certain other nodes, and if I'm trusting 10 other nodes and 8 of them all agree on something, then I'm like, okay, that's good enough for me. And you can prove that it's okay as long as nodes are trusting, trustworthy nodes. And I think something like that is a much. I don't know about proof of stake. I don't know. I think proof of stake depends on.
I'm sorry, proof of what?
Proof of stake. This is the thing we were talking about, like the voting based on how much share you have, how much of the currency you own.
Is it
STAKE.
not proof of space? What is proof of space versus proof of work?
Proof of space is an intensive algorithm that can only be run when you have a certain amount of memory, computer memory,
Right.
or disk space.
Yeah. So I don't know what I was saying.
You don't know
Stellar is
about proof
different
of
than
stake,
proof of
but
stake.
you think that these things work well as long as.
So I think Stellar is something
Stellar.
that could potentially work well. And I actually, before I read about Stellar, I was thinking about the consensus protocol I wanted to use in Gresham, and I wrote it all down. And then I read about Stellar. I'm like, oh, this is what I came up with. So, but after reading this book, though, you got to keep in mind I read this book.
Yeah.
So something like Stellar, something similar to Stellar, is probably what I'm going to go with Gresham. But I wanted to mention proof of stake again because, just like proof of work, it depends on the currency having value. And this kind of comes back to the economics, where I don't believe that there's any kind of reliable mechanism that ensures that a cryptocurrency is going to have value. Satoshi Nakamoto talks in here about the more people who are using it, the more value it'll have. But that's not, the amount of value it has is somewhat arbitrary compared to the number of people who are using it. Like we could switch to the cent as our currency, and now suddenly everyone has 100 times as much money. I mean, that's just a denomination issue. I don't think the value has anything to do with that. I mean, there's value in terms of how
When you say
useful
value,
it is.
you mean value in exchange of
Like the
versus
price.
another currency?
The price,
Or value as in utility?
right?
Enough people use it, accept it. It's
Enough-
accepted everywhere.
right.
It's like Visa.
Enough people use it, accept it, then it has utility, so it has value in that sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of value, like price, that's a completely different mechanism for what determines that.
Right.
And I think Satoshi kind of confuses the two notions, and a lot of the cryptocurrency people do. They think the more people use it, the more its price will go up, but that's not how these things work.
I think a lot of the times the cryptocurrency that's used on a network is the same that you pay for computation on the network.
Right.
So the idea is, I think, in sort of a more stable one, it's tied to the sort of cost or value of computation.
Right. And Martin, you brought up the point that maybe blockchain could be used, it emerged from cryptocurrencies, but maybe it can be used in other domains. And I'm skeptical that that's possible because I think blockchain really depends on the token having value in order for its consensus mechanism to work. So you really need some kind of currency or currency-like thing in there, some kind of valuable token. Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
Actually, I saw something about it in the Wired magazine about how it could be used for voting and how they can verify each vote against the other vote. I didn't really understand it because I don't understand the whole cryptocurrency and blockchain thing now.
I'd
Yeah.
love to talk about cryptographic voting mechanism schemes with you at some point, but
Yeah.
I feel like that's outside of the scope.
So
yeah.
There's one in here they talk about that we didn't get to called Democracy Earth, and they basically, their cryptocurrency is like a form of vote. And so it's kind of like it is voting, but it's also got this like monetary value, and I don't know how well that's going to work out. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, this was a good discussion. I think, does anyone have any like burning final things before we end? All right, I think we're good. So cryptocurrency, UBI, there's way more to be said about this than we can cover in one session. So maybe we'll bring it up again another time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for explaining so much about that.
Oh yeah, no problem. I'm